There was a lot of uncertainty after George St-Pierre captured UFC middleweight gold at UFC 217. Would he defend the title? Would he abdicate it? Would he try to hold on to it and go to welterweight? Who would be next? What would be next for the brand new champion? Tonight, we got an answer here on Thursday, December 7th, 2017. George St-Pierre has officially vacated his UFC middleweight title after just 31 days of winning it, telling the organization and the wider public, quote, "My fight at UFC 217 was one of the greatest nights of my life, but I now need to take some time to focus on my health. Out of respect to the athletes and the sport, I don't want to hold up the division. I will be giving up my belt, and once I'm healthy, I look forward to working with the UFC to determine what's next in my career." That reference to his health, St-Pierre, according to one of his coaches, John Danaher, had incredible problems putting on weight, vomiting fits throughout that UFC 217 camp. Later on, after the fight, being diagnosed with colitis, and a timetable for his return is not known. So St-Pierre is not the champion. Who is the champion? Well, here's the rest of the news. Robert Whittaker, who was the interim champion after beating Yoel Romero at UFC 213 in July, he is now the official full champion, and he is going to face Luke Rockhold in Perth, Australia, in the main event at UFC 221 in February. So this leaves us with a few questions. We know what's next, but what can we really say about what just happened? Well, you can say, I guess, a few things, right? For starters, it wasn't that long, as I mentioned, just 31 days, in total contrast to his title run at welterweight, which according to MMA Junkie's Mike Bond was 2,064 days. And I'm not comparing the careers of George St-Pierre and Jermaine Durandamy. I'm not comparing their title runs. I'm not exactly comparing a whole lot other than to say there's weird parallels between the two. For starters, they both lost, or I should say, one was stripped of her title, the other one gave it up, but after fighting in New York, after coming up a weight class, and yes, there's a big difference between just handing back a title and being stripped of one, but they both kind of abandoned it relatively quickly. Just sort of some weird parallels there. But really, this vacating, this abdication of the throne at middleweight by St-Pierre essentially comes down to two schools of thought in terms of how we think of it. On the one side, you have people who are quite happy about it. They might say, well, look, did this follow the traditional contendership queue? Did this really use the normal means by which we establish a champion, establish a set of contenders, build hierarchy and a pathway to the top of that division? Well, no, it didn't do any of that. It was, in fact, it circumvented all of it. It was completely different. It had no real relationship to the normal protocol or procedure by which we actually build contenders and create title fights. And people who are sympathetic to that, they're going to tell you, yeah, it didn't go by the book, but wasn't UFC 217 fun? Wasn't there a magical moment there? Look at the historic achievement of St-Pierre becoming now one of the four only fighters to win a belt in two different weight classes. Wasn't that kind of worth it? The pay-per-view buy rate was great. The gate was great. Everyone had a good time. Maybe Michael Bisping lost, and he's not happy about that. But generally speaking, this was, by most measurements, a grand success. And then the other school of thought is a little bit different. It says, well, look, yes, in the short term, the buy rate for UFC 217 was great. That's true. Here's the problem. This is just not the way divisions should be treated. And this is not the way other fighters and other contenders in the division should be treated. Some of that blame goes on the UFC. Why on earth did they grant a title shot to a guy with, yes, if you continue in this path, which, by the way, you don't have to continue in, then there will be some restrictions and conditions on your behavior. But really, all they had as a guarantee was that one fight. Why would they do that when they knew there was probably a pretty good chance that that path they had laid out for him, which he was not under any obligation to go through, would not be the path he actually took? He would go a different route. That was just really poor planning, short-term thinking by the UFC, and they should never have done it. And people who believe that will probably also say St-Pierre deserves some responsibility here or some blame, right? If you believe that school of thought, you're saying to yourself, St-Pierre is not alone in this. The UFC had a hand, but if you're St-Pierre, you have to think about the rest of the division. You have to think about what this means. The best way for a division to function is for, over time, for the title to be handed to competitors through competition, not through abdication. You don't transfer the star power from the more established veteran champion to the rising contender. It can be confusing for fans. All of a sudden, there's this champion. Where did they come from? Who did they get it from? It's just really not an ideal way to manage divisions. And it also should be noted there were some contradictory positions about this whole thing from the crowd who did want St-Pierre to get that fight against Michael Bisping. Namely, hey, this is also good for Michael Bisping. He'll get a big payday. And that's true. He actually did. But now we've robbed Peter to pay Paul because we don't have one for Robert Whittaker. He was owed that fight. He was owed the opportunity to get there. And you might say, correctly, Michael Bisping, significantly more senior in his career, it's okay for Robert Whittaker to wait. Michael Bisping was the guy we needed to look after. But there's really no guarantee Robert Whittaker will ever get that fight. That could have been his one chance in his whole career to get it, and now it's gone. There are no guarantees. We're just simply assuming that eventually he'll probably right the ship. He's young enough. He'll get a big fight down the road. But that's really just conjecture. There's no proof of that. If he loses to Luke Rockhold in February, everything gets derailed. Now he lost his opportunity. If you're going to complain that somebody would be losing out on a payday, so we should give him one, there should be some recognition that somebody else also lost out on that very same payday to make the other guy's payday happen. On the other hand, though, maybe you're looking at this more charitably. Maybe you're saying, hey, for all the problems here, at least St-Pierre didn't wait. Once the fight was over, he took some time to relax, he got a medical diagnosis, and he realized this was just not a path he could go down. 31 days, giving the belt back. That does actually provide some clarity for Robert Whittaker, who's now the champ, for Luke Rockhold, who's going to get a title shot, and for the rest of the division. St-Pierre's gone, Bisping's going to retire. What is there really to complain about? We'll just have to wait and see what happens. On the one hand, it could be true that, yes, while this was a short-term cash grab, there really are no long-term costs to this. On the other hand, it could also be true that, yes, this was a short-term cash grab, and if you don't take care of these divisions, if you don't manicure them, if you don't treat them the way they need to be treated, they're not going to work the way they're supposed to. In an era where we're complaining about star power, for a star to not share his star power with the rising contender by having a fight with them and potentially giving that person an opportunity to get a victory, they keep it all for themselves. That's not really good for how this sport is supposed to work. There's also another question here is, what do you say about the title run itself relative to other middleweight title runs? Well, I'm not here to suggest that GSP or Michael Bisping are contending for who had the best middleweight title run alongside Anderson Silva. Far from it. We're talking about two of the least impressive middleweight title runs, but it should be noted for everyone who was really mad at Michael Bisping for, yes, he won the Luke Rockhold fight, but then he fought Dan Henderson and, and then he took some time off and then he fought George St-Pierre. What can we really say about this title reign that he had? Yes, there are some knocks against it, but look at GSP's title reign. Now, he gave it back. He didn't make any pretense about it being anything other than it was, but neither did Michael Bisping. And you could say, well, St-Pierre beat Michael Bisping to get the title, and that's true, but St-Pierre also abandoned it. And would you like St-Pierre's chances against Luke Rockhold? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. I don't know that I'd like him so much. And Michael Bisping, having already lost to Luke Rockhold, came back, got victory, stopped him. Not only stopped him in his tracks, put him out, and that win was as clean as a win can get. You can say whatever else you want about the title reign of Michael Bisping. You can never take away UFC 199 from him. That was an incredible win, coming in on short notice. Every conceivable advantage was given to Luke Rockhold, and Michael Bisping still won. There's a case to be made, and again, we're talking about the sort of lower end of middleweight title runs here, but it is worth mentioning in defense of Michael Bisping, there are some salvageable notions here. So, should GSP have not had this fight? It's a matter of debate. Should he have fought at welterweight against Tyron Woodley? That's a matter of debate. He still might. The jury's still out. We actually don't know what's going to happen next, but here's what we do know. Robert Whittaker is your new UFC middleweight champion of the world, and on February 10th, he's going to put it on the line against Luke Rockhold. We'll have to wait and see what happens with George St-Pierre. We're going to have to wait and see what happens with Michael Bisping. But tonight, a new champion was crowned, although it wasn't in a fight, and while there are some questions that remain, there at least is some clarity now to the UFC middleweight title picture. Subscribe to MMA Fighting below, like this video, and what do you think? Did the UFC do the right thing? Was UFC 217 with St-Pierre getting the middleweight title shot? Was that the right call? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Luke Thomas. This is MMA Fighting.